And so what we're seeing is agentic AI eating every task really that humans can do over the next 3 to 5 years. I'm sure what we'll get into more is the specifics of the sorts of things that can be automated and how, but that's sort of like the framework I'm thinking of it within, is like this is a fundamentally transformational time, and everything will be disrupted. Every task, every process will be automated, either partially or fully, and fully really over the next 2 to 3 years.
This is Social Pulse Podcast Agency Edition, your go-to guide to solving your biggest marketing agency challenges authentically. I'm your host, Mike Alton, and each episode is an honest and frank look at what agencies go through, from turning clients to tackling tech and ideas that you can apply to your own business. And now, the rest of today's episode. Welcome back to Social Pulse Podcast Agency Edition, where each and every week we're talking to marketing agencies like you, going through many of the same struggles you're going through and sharing their stories. Subscribe to find in each episode the inspiration, the motivation, and the perspiration that go into growing and scaling agencies like yours. Now, are you curious about how artificial intelligence can revolutionize your content marketing efforts? Just imagine having tools that not only inspire creative ideas, but also streamline your entire content creation process, ensuring high quality output every time. In a world where creativity and efficiency often seem at odds, AI bridges that gap, marrying innovation with productivity. But how exactly does AI work in the realm of content marketing and agencies and working on behalf of clients? Well, today we're joined by Kristin Tynski, an expert who seamlessly integrates AI into the fabric of her content marketing, SEO, and PR strategies. As the co-founder and senior VP of creative at Fractl, Kristin has harnessed AI to turn data into compelling content, automate mundane tasks, and ultimately drive remarkable results. Join us as we dive into the practicalities and the potentials of AI in content creation, from the initial spark of inspiration to final execution. Hey, Kristin, welcome to the show.
Hey, Mike, thanks for having me. That was quite the introduction. Thanks for setting the stage on AI. It's a very exciting topic, so should be fun.
It's one of my favorite topics. As you know, listeners might know, I have got another podcast that's all about AI, the AI Hat podcast. And one of the things I talk about on that show often is the fact that I use Claude to prepare for each and every one of these podcasts. I've created a custom persona in a tool called Magi, which is basically a custom GPT that allows me to use Claude or whatever large language model I want. And I tell it who the guest is. I give them the LinkedIn. I tell them, what topics they want to talk about. It understands me. It understands Agorapulse and the show format. And it starts to give me things like, all right, great. Based on everything I know, here's what we could talk about with Kristin. Here's 5 topic ideas. And I pick one. And then it says, cool, here's 10 title ideas for the show based on that topic. And I pick one. And then it generates the questions and the interview description, and of course the bio. So while you did a lot of work to get there, I'm reading what Claude ultimately thinks about your
Yeah,
background.
and that's what you just described is a new way of working, really. And I think people are starting to adapt to it and realize that the way that they used to construct a problem and problem solving in their mind used to be much different than it really can be now. So you would have a question, and then you might go to Google, and then you might test some things or try some things, um, iterate, and then maybe find the solution. But with AI, that process can be shortcutted a lot. And I think the real skill set is understanding what these models are capable of and how to prompt them in the right ways to get the sorts of outputs that you want. And then also thinking really critically about the steps that you need to take in order to accomplish a specific task. So I'm sure what we'll talk about a lot today is agents and pipelines, and how you can use AI and discrete specific steps to create something much better than you could get in just a simple prompted response. So like what you just described as your process of preparing for this interview, that entire process that you said, okay, I did this and this and this and had this conversation with the AI, that could be partially or wholly automated, right? So it just became a single input and an output. So the guest on the show, and the output is every asset you need. So all of the questions, all the interview prep work, whatever else. And so from my position, what I'm seeing happening is the capabilities of AI at this point enable agents like that, but well beyond that as well. And so what we're seeing is agentic AI eating every task really that humans can do over the next 3 to 5 years. I'm sure what we'll get into more is the specifics of the sorts of things that can be automated and how, but that's sort of like the framework I'm thinking of it within, is like this is a transformational, fundamentally transformational time, and everything will be disrupted. Every task, every process will be automated, either partially or fully, and fully really over the next 2 to 3 years. So,
Could not agree more. I mean, that's basically the premise of my other show, that we are in fact living through the fourth industrial revolution. It's not just marketing that's changing. It's not just other areas of technology. It's every aspect of society. It's going to be really, really different in just a few short years. It's one of the differences between this industrial revolution and, say, the first or second that lasted decades. So it's going to be a little hard for everybody to keep up, which is why I'm doing things like another podcast on that. But I also like the point that you made, that we need to see how to use this technology, because it is a technology. It's not a tool like Canva where I can say, oh, hey, if you've never used it, you can go in here and you can create images and graphics and that sort of thing. And you instantly understand what that tool is. You might not know how to use it, but
hmm.
you already have a concept. AI is very different. So to your point, I would love for you to talk about how specifically you're seeing it transform content marketing. But before you even get to that, I'd love if you could talk a little about AI agents, because that is not something we've talked about on this particular show at all. And I'd love your take on what AI agents are, knowing that everyone's probably got their own definition these days.
So I mean, I think of agentic AI as the next step or stage in the evolution of how we're integrating AI into our workflows. And really all an agent is some sort of generative model, usually a large language model that's put in some kind of step-by-step process that maybe loops, maybe iterates, but it has a specific input and a specific set of outputs. And in terms of marketing, any agent could really be any specific task. So, from doing research for a content piece to an entire pipeline that does the research, the writing, the iteration, the social media post creation, and the dissemination of it. So you could have a very simple agent, or you could have a very complex agent pipeline that does a lot of things at once. You could also think of modules, so like agentic modules that do one task, another agentic module does another task, and so on and so on. And then perhaps you tie them together and put those tasks in more complex pipelines, or have overarching LLMs manage specific agents that are doing specific types of task work to create more complex systems. Um, so like if you extrapolate on that, you can sort of imagine that once you have all of these agents that can do all of the specific tasks of an agency or of a specific marketing activity, then you can have it managed by an LLM on top of all of that, and have almost the entire process of an agency fully automated.
I know we're seeing tools like Salesforce um, have built-in agents that can connect some of those dots. I'm seeing needs for it already every single day. I'm using tools like Gemini's Deep Research, which is fantastic for researching complex topics. But then at the end of the end of the end, it just gives you a report, which you can then interact with like in any other chat model, but it's not able to do something with it, which, to
Mhm.
your point, an agent, once we get to that point across the board, could take that research and turn it into a research paper or disseminate it among staff or whatever it is that you were hoping to do
Mhm.
with that. When it comes to content marketing, how are you seeing some of these changes kind of trickle through?
I mean, through every type of content creation is being influenced. So, I mean, obviously, first was text with GPT-3, or even earlier. We started to see disruption with that. But yeah, I mean, I think every writer is now using it, or almost every writer is using it to some extent. I think it's driving the cost of at least a certain type of content to zero over time. That just makes it even more important to be considering, how do we create even more interesting and advanced and thorough content using agentic processes that are doing more than one thing. It's not just, hey, write me an article, Gemini. It's do all of this deep research, distill it, refine it, iterate on it, come up with a thesis, then write the article, then distill it, refine it. Like you could imagine a looped process with several different agents with different responsibilities, all contributing to the quality of something much larger than like just an article that you're creating. So yeah, I don't know if that completely answered the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Because again, like that's the kind of way that I'm using AI, every single day. You talked about the showrunner process that I mentioned. At some point, I might not have to be even in that loop the way I am today. It's a like I said, it's a custom GPT or a custom set of instructions where we're going back and forth, and I have it predefined steps. But at some point, you'd think I could program the AI to know what would be good topics, to know how to properly format and hype somebody up and all these kinds of things to make sure that the output at each step is exactly what we want, and then take it to the next step. I'm wondering
I actually
if we
think that would
think
be
back
pretty easy
to
to
oh, go
to
ahead.
do. I think, I mean, really all you need is a few different data sources. So you need
Mm,
probably a connection to LinkedIn or Blue Sky or whatever social media is, so you can put in a social media handle of your guest, and then you would scrape that content around the guest to understand who they are, have an LLM distill it, um, maybe do, like, some additional LLM work to expand on the profile a bit. So, like, if you got my LinkedIn profile, you could probably understand or, um, estimate maybe some other things about me. So you could do data enhancement with LLMs and then, have it write a report for you. And that could be one asset that's generated. Have it create different templates for different social media posts associated with that. All of it together could be done pretty easily. You just need those several data sources with APIs and then stitch it together with the large language models. So yeah.
yeah, yeah, which is fantastic. I mean, already the process is saving me literally hours. I used to spend 2 hours per guest preparing for these shows. Now it's 20 minutes. So it's a huge savings. And like you said, most of us now we're at least playing with the chat. We're at least starting to use the text interface, maybe to create some content and that sort of thing. What led you to start to bring that into your actual agency? Because some of the agency owners I've talked to, both on this show and elsewhere, they're still trying to keep AI at arm's length, and obviously you're embracing it. What was the difference for you?
I'm not sure exactly. I find it difficult to understand why an agency owner would be keeping AI at arm's length. I think that's like
Mm,
an existential risk. I think if you're doing that, if you're scared of AI and you're not doing everything you can to understand it and how it integrates into your processes and how it's changing our industry, you're going to get left behind. So for me, I've been thinking about and worrying about the implications of generative AI since like GPT-2 and experimenting with it to try and understand what its capabilities are going to be in the next 6, 12, 18 months. And then try and think strategically for how to best leverage those tools in a way that's not going to be like, um, I guess made like a moot point because some new model or some new tool comes out that basically does everything for you. Uh, that's sort of the environment that we're operating in now. It's like because things are happening so quickly, there's a real risk of doing something that's not really worth doing because it's just going to be done better in, 2 weeks from now.
that is so true, and I couldn't agree more with your point about how if you are not interested in AI at this moment, if you are unwilling to adapt and adopt AI, you'll be left behind. And again, I'll harken back to the fact that we're in the fourth industrial revolution. If you think back to each of the industrial revolutions, there were jobs that were completely eliminated and made unnecessary. In the first industrial revolution, I often talk about the guys that we used to pay to walk up and down the streets to light the street lamps, which were powered by gasoline. And that's no longer needed, and that wasn't needed back then. All those people lost their jobs, and they all had to transition into something else. Now, we've had a lot of reports recently that talk about how there will probably be anywhere from 70 to 95 million jobs lost over the next 5 years due to AI, but potentially 170 million jobs created thanks to AI and new initiatives and new technologies and that sort of thing. So that means people will lose their jobs, and they simply have to transition into new areas. Agencies they aren't going away. They just need to embrace this technology. So I'd love if you could share how you and your team are embracing it from that perspective. How is it helping you like inspire content ideas and other forms of content marketing?
So my job at Fractal now is really to figure out how AI can be applied to our processes and to understand its implications for the industry and how things are going to change. So what I've been working on for the last few years is really trying to automate internal Fractal processes so that our team can use them and that I can really understand how they could be put together in larger agentic pipelines that do bigger, more complex things. So starting from ideation, which we do a ton of at Fractal since we're essentially uh, a data journalism content creator on behalf of brands that also does PR promotion, but it starts with ideation. So we have a giant corpus of all the ideas we've come up with over the last 10 plus years. It's like thousands and thousands of ideas and metadata associated with it. So like peer review of the quality of the idea, whether it was selected, a ton of other stuff. So using all that, um, putting it into a well formatted data set that we could then use to train, to fine tune um, GPT-4, and then use a fine tuned model in a pipeline for doing ideation. So we have an internal tool that basically has a fine tuned model to like a fractal ideator based on all of our training data from all of the thousands of ideas that we've come up with. And then that generates hundreds of ideas based on an input topic, goes through several different refinement cycles where different agent LLMs are evaluating the ideas across a bunch of different criteria that we've defined at Fractal and scoring them and then sorting them and then making a recommendation. And then we select the ones that are shortlisted and then it builds out um, what we call production cards, which are essentially like deep research on exactly how the campaign would be executed, what data sources would be used, um, what the complexities are, what the timelines, estimates, and things like that. All of these things were pieces that were very difficult to estimate or very time consuming to estimate on each idea that we were coming up with for clients because we would come up with dozens of ideas a day. So that sort of thing saves a huge amount of time. And then, of course, content creation work. So right now, because we do data journalism for the most part, we're not creating like, prompt and response AI content, which I wouldn't recommend anyone do. We're using AI within the framework of creating something of larger value. So if it's totally managed by AI, and I have created a few pipelines that do that sort of thing, it's research, iteration, refinement, more research, iteration, refinement to get to a much better final product that's well sourced and cited, has information that was a source of truth because it leveraged Google search results or something like that. So yeah, content creation is a huge piece of it. Ideation is a huge piece of it. And then PR, which is the other half of our business, which is taking all of the content and the newsworthy data journalism that we've done on behalf of brands and pushing that out to journalists and top tier journalists at major publications to try and get them to pick those stories up. And the best way to do that is to do it in like a high touch way, right? Like journalists get hundreds of emails a day, and breaking through that noise is the hard part. The way you do that is by having a really, really personalized subject line and a really deep understanding of the sort of things that they cover and the beats that they cover and what they write about. And so we've also created automated processes for doing that, where we have databases of journalists, and then the content that we're pitching to them. We have a pipeline where that content is analyzed. All of the newsworthy and noteworthy things that could be pitched are taken out of it. And then pitch lists are built automatically based on that. And then for each of those specific pitch targets, so each journalist, a custom pitch is written based on the content that's being pitched to them, what they've written about previously, what we know about them based on like their social profiles and other things like that, so that we can be sure when we do this automated outreach that it's going to be high touch, it's going to be applicable to the things they care about, and therefore it's going to have a much higher success rate than like, some mass blast approach that's not targeted. And then, yeah, I mean, other automations, there are literally hundreds, perhaps thousands of other automations that exist within like the marketing, advertising, and PR space. A lot of them that I'm playing with in different ways. I mean, there's a ton that are related to social media, a ton that are related um, to like more management, like overarching processes of managing multiple agents. The rabbit hole is super deep.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Now, you mentioned you talked about using ChatGPT initially, and then you talked about a private LLM. Are you using Llama, or what are some of the other tools or platforms that are part of that tech stack for you now?
No, it's not. It wasn't a private LLM. It's just a fine-tuned GPT-4
Got it.
model. So as long as you have a well-formatted data set, you can fine-tune a model pretty cheaply, and then use that as you would any other endpoint, any other OpenAI endpoint. It's just instead of pointing it to GPT-4o, you point it into GPT-4o fine-tune model one, whatever.
Got it. Got it. And that's a huge point. Having that fine-tuned data, that clean data, that was something Kristen talked
Mhm.
about at the very beginning of that answer. Folks, we're talking with Kristen Tynski about the role AI can play in improving your marketing strategies and tactics. Now, here to tell us about how we've layered AI into Agorapulse is our good friend Daryl.
Hey there, Daryl Braille, Chief Marketing Officer here at Agorapulse, the industry's best social media management platform. I gotta tell you, I love AI. Why? I don't view it as a threat. Rather, it makes me better. It's a colleague. It's a collaborator. Let's say I do a social media post, but you know what? I'm a little long-winded. I want it shorter. Maybe I want it longer. Maybe I want it punchier, more assertive, more inspirational, more funny. That's what our writing assistant does. Check it out, agorapulse.com.
So, what's been the impact of setting up all these processes and automations? How has incorporating AI, impacted or improved, efficiency, effectiveness, particularly when it comes to content marketing?
I think it's improved the quality of our work substantially because we could do a lot of things that weren't feasible before. So doing a lot more initial research, coming up with many more ideas, being able to vet those ideas at scale. So it enables us to find those like hidden gems that before were sort of felt like luck. Now you can be thorough enough and comprehensive enough to find really truly good ideas on almost every occasion. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, also just like the daily task work, a lot of it's able to be automated now. And we've written, small automations or small agentic frameworks for automating all sorts of different things. There really are so many things that we've tried. I have, if you go on my GitHub, I've written like 25 different automation tasks over like the last couple of years that go into some of these different things that you could do. But really, they're still just the tip of the iceberg.
Love it. We'll link to that in the show notes. I'm wondering if you could share though any challenges maybe that you've faced when implementing AI and these kinds of workflows and how you've overcome those challenges.
I think the hardest challenges are really programming related. So I didn't start learning to program until like maybe 3 years ago, and I'm totally self-taught. So there's been a learning curve for me. Obviously, having an LLM to help you is amazing, which I didn't have for the first couple of years. But now that I have it, I feel like I've been able to level up my skill set really considerably. Um, but the challenges were really around learning how to program with an LLM um, most effectively and understanding the limitations that exist now with the models now and the systems that we currently have to manage and work with them. So Cursor is an IDE, like a programming IDE that incorporates large language models into it. And so there are a lot of different ways that you could go about trying to program with a large language model. And some of them are really efficient and some of them are super inefficient. And so I've gone back and forth and tested a lot of different ways of working. And I think I've finally found like the most efficient way for me, at least at this point in time. Um, but the process of figuring out those methodologies and also learning what these models are truly capable of and figuring out how to talk to them in the right ways and push them in the right ways. That's been I think the biggest learning curve.
And that's a fantastic point you made, which is that today's large language models can be invaluable, co-pilots or assistants as we're going through any kind of task that we're not familiar with what to do next, whether it's coding, or I've talked about in other shows how I need to come up with a brand story for Agorapulse back in 2024, and I had a great iterative conversation back and forth with ChatGPT at the time about different brand story frameworks and how we were going to accomplish that because I didn't have time to read 16 different frameworks for creating a brand story. I was familiar with just a couple. And so that was a huge time saving there. Now,
Mm.
for agencies who are listening and they're thinking about setting up some of these automations and these processes, and they're listening to how you use AI, I think a lot of them are going to be asking, well, where's the human in the loop? How do you balance these AI generated insights and copy and reports and so on with human creativity to ensure that your content or your client's content remains engaging and authentic?
Well, I would say it sort of starts at when you're creating a pipeline. Any sort of agentic automated content creation pipeline, you need to have in mind exactly what you want the output to look like. And that end result needs to be something that's considerably better than what is really like generally possible with a large language model. So if 95% of people are just going to type in some prompt into, the chat system of GPT or whatever is the default thing, they're all going to get the same sort of outputs. So in order to be competitive, you need to do something more than that. It's not just a prompt and response, it's a prompt, and then that prompt goes out and does something, collects research or data from other sources or APIs, does something with that data, synthesizes it, manipulates it, understands it in some way, processes it, and presents it or displays it, does more than just ask the large language model to do one input output. And that may change. I mean, like these new models like O1 and O3 when it comes out, what they're doing behind the scenes is all of this work, like this thinking work that needs to be done. So I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen. I'm not sure exactly how much like a human in the loop is going to be needed beyond being the orchestrator, where you are determining what the inputs and the outputs are and what is a satisfactory output, and making sure that whatever that pipeline is creating something of unique value that other people aren't creating.
Yeah, I think the key lesson there is that you're spending sufficient time initially to make sure that whatever that process is, whatever the prompt or system is, that it aligns with what you're trying to accomplish as a brand, as an agency, or on behalf of your clients. It's something I've talked about again in my other show, having custom GPTs and instructions that are trained in my voice, my target audience, my goals, all the kinds of assets, so that I've got an AI chief of staff that I can talk to who knows everything I needed to know about me, and we can have really legitimate conversations. Um, One other conversation I had on that other show was with Mitch Jackson, an attorney. We talked at length about AI and the law and copyright concerns and that sort of thing. I'm curious what you think when it comes to ethics and ethical considerations about using AI generated content and AI for content creation.
It's a great question. I think a lot of it is still up in the air. I mean, I worry a lot about the dead internet theory, which if you haven't heard of that, is basically this idea that the internet's going to get clogged up with so much AI generated junk that it will be impossible to parse and become useless. Um,
Mm.
I think that is starting to happen, and so I think there are ethical considerations that you should have when you're creating agentic pipelines about what the output is and the value that that output creates. Is it creating just like generic slop that's not worth much to anyone, but maybe has a profit motive for you? Maybe don't do that. If it can create real true value in a new, unique way that's leveraging large language models in a way that hasn't been leveraged before, do that. In terms of copyrights and plagiarism and all of that sort of thing, I think it's important to check your work, make sure that you're using real sources of truth in content creation and you're not just relying on a large language model to use its weights to determine if something's true or not. You should have an input that's source of truth information that's then synthesized by the large language model, not just relying purely on the large language model's knowledge. Um, and then, yeah, I mean, what are you doing with it? What is the goal of it? I mean, are you trying to do something positive for society? Are you trying to influence something in a negative or positive way? Like the power associated, the force multiplying effect of these tools is a greater responsibility than I think we've really ever had as marketers. And it's important to think about when you create automated pipelines, what the implications are of those and what happens if they're scaled.
So we're already seeing, to your point, a tremendous amount of content being created that's AI generated. Much of it is slop, as you said. So how do we currently measure, or how are you currently measuring how the content that you're creating is actually impacting business in a positive way?
Well, I mean, because we're not typically creating content entirely with AI. So it's not just an input and
Yeah.
then a content output. We're using it in the process of creating larger, more sophisticated data journalism work. So it's impacted our clients in that we're able to do more sophisticated things. We can do deeper analysis. We can do more complex statistical testing. We can gather data faster because we can write scrapers faster and interact with APIs faster. And come up with more ideas, refine those ideas faster, write better briefs. Every aspect that I've talked about contributes to a better end result.
Love it. Folks, this is just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to artificial intelligence and how it could potentially help your agency. So if this is something you'd like for us to talk about more on this show, please, leave a comment or hit me up, mike.alton@agorapulse.com, and let me know. I'd be happy to bring on more guests. But Kristin, you've been absolutely fantastic. For folks who want to reach out and learn more from you, or they want to reach out to Fractl, where should they go?
I'm most active on LinkedIn, or you can email me, Kristin@frac.tl.
Fantastic. Thank you, Kristin. Thanks all of you for tuning in. That's all the time we've got for today, friends. But don't forget to find the Social Pulse Podcast Agency Edition on Apple. Drop us a review. We'd love to know what you think. Until next time. Thank you for listening to another episode of Social Pulse Podcast Agency Edition, hosted by Mike Alton and powered by Agorapulse, the #1 rated social media management solution, which you can learn more about at agorapulse.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe on your favorite podcast player and be sure to leave us a review. Your feedback is important to us.